Hello everybody, welcome back to another video, and today is a big one because we finally have news to discuss in regard to the 2023 season of the Overwatch League. On Wednesday, we got an announcement about the format for this season, how it's going to differ from previous seasons, and so today we're going to talk about it, break it down, talk about everything that kind of happened on Wednesday, and I'll give you my thoughts and opinions on it all as we kind of get going. So in a community update video and also an article on the Overwatch League website, Zoe, Sean Miller, and Mr. X all talked about what is to come for this season. So we're going to start. I'm just going to read this quick kind of TLDR bullet point list that they have in the article. As always, links to everything I talk about are in the description. There's several things going to be linking down there. So if there's anything you want to check out and learn more, kind of hear some of the stuff that's going on, links are in the description. But just going to give you the TLDR, I'll throw it up here as well. The season will be split into spring and summer stages, anchored by 2 global LAN events, the Mid-Season Madness Global Tournament, and the Grand Finals. Teams will remain divided into West and East regions, with the East featuring a more open ecosystem that offers the opportunity for select Contenders teams to qualify for and participate in Overwatch League play. Overwatch League competition returns on March 23rd with a 3-week Pro-Am tournament in the West that showcases both Overwatch League and Contenders teams. Overwatch League circuit play in both regions is scheduled to begin on April 27th. League standings will no longer be determined by league points, but rather overall record in regional qualifiers. As they say here, we'll have more moments to engage fans in Overwatch esports between major league events through Overwatch World Cup qualifiers and small tournaments during certain bye weeks. And as I say here, the second half of the season will mirror the first in terms of format, ultimately culminating in playoffs and grand finals, with more details to come later. They also included this calendar here, rough kind of 2023 season calendar. It doesn't have any dates on it, but it does give you kind of some information on how things go and how they look. So just once again, something I'll throw up on the screen that you guys are seeing now. I think it's an interesting change, and like I said, we're going to jump in and kind of dive into each little bit, piece by piece, kind of break down the individual things about it and give you my thoughts on it. I'm going to be basing this on kind of the article that they have, like I said, on the website, so if you want to follow along, check out that link in the description. I'll read through it and kind of give you my thoughts on each thing as we go. So here they start off by talking about the spring stage format. In the West, teams will compete in spring stage qualifiers to determine seeding for spring stage knockouts and mid-season madness qualification. In the East, Open Division and Contenders teams will hold a series of competitions to determine who gets to compete with Overwatch League teams. Regional tournaments in South Korea, Asia Pacific, and Australia, New Zealand will produce a field of 12 teams that will then compete in spring stage opens, concurrent to round-robin spring stage qualifiers action at the Overwatch League level. The top teams from Spring Stage Opens will then join the Overwatch League teams for Spring Stage and Knockouts, which will determine Mid-Season Madness qualification. So there's obviously a lot to break down here. Let's just start with the West and kind of get the West out of the way first. I think it's the easiest one, right? The West is going to work pretty much the same way it has for the past several seasons, where the teams in the region are all just going to play each other multiple times throughout the season, though less than they did last season. Similar to what they played each other in 2021. So they'll play each other a certain number of times. They'll play 8 games going into the kind of knockouts and this kind of qualifier stage. And then they will get determined for seeding, and then they'll play in this kind of knockout stage. I believe the top seed only in those 8 qualifier games, only the top seed gets automatic placement into the tournament without having to play in the knockouts. I think that's what they said. That's my understanding. It might be multiple. Actually, I take that back. We'll get there. It's 2 teams, the top 2 teams. That's in the Mid-Season Madness section. But 8 games isn't a lot of games. That was kind of the problem, I thought, with 2021, where you had 16 games for the whole season. And so it was 4 games per qualifier. I think when you only have 2 tournaments, I think 8 games isn't as bad. Last year it was 6. 2019 it was 7, and I don't remember how many it was in 2020 once you got to the tournaments, because it was a little different in 2020. Everything kind of worked out in a different way. So this is a format that I don't love necessarily, only 8 games, but I think part of the problem in 2021 with having only 8 games or 16 games was that it was the only Overwatch esports event going on. I think when you sprinkle in the World Cup and you have a lot more kind of other teams kind of playing, I think it does provide some level of benefit to only having fewer games, because if you have Contenders and Open Division teams that are playing like 20 games, and then also Overwatch League teams that are playing like 20 games, there's not as much of an advantage now to being an Overwatch League team and having to play fewer games, right? You're not playing as many games, and therefore you kind of have more time to rest, more time to practice, more time to scrim and whatnot, which opens up your schedule a little more and opens up your ability, right? They talked about it a lot with the Eastern Division, how they want it to be a challenge for those Open Division Contenders teams, and that way I do think it's pretty good. In the East, this Open Division Contenders change is really, really exciting, I think, for a lot of reasons, because we're going to get to see some of that talent that we normally don't see in the Overwatch League, now that they get to kind of play through that region. And I think it is very important that they're doing this in the Eastern region and not the Western region for a number of reasons. The biggest one being the Eastern region isn't that exciting, and it wasn't that exciting for the past couple of years, and it was the same 7 teams playing against each other. Last season, I thought last season was pretty brutal in the way that it was the same group of teams playing each other over and over and over. Every stage, you get the same games over and over and over again. And it didn't make for as exciting of a thing, because you don't get into the point where you get to a tournament and you're like, oh, who's going to be better between these 2 teams who we haven't seen play in a while, when you see them play every stage and every meta. It did kind of get a little stale. So I do like that we're going to see it kind of open up a little bit more. And we're going to add in teams from Open Division and Contenders to be able to compete. I think my biggest complaint and criticism is the way, and I understand why this is happening, obviously from a logistical standpoint, but the fact that in order to compete in Open Division or Contenders, or Contenders, I should say, in the East, you have to be 17, which is also the age you have to be for the Overwatch League to sign a contract. Now, my guess is, knowing this would be the format is a big part of the reason why they lowered the age to 17, because they knew this would be an issue where players who are just out of eligibility because they're 18, all of a sudden now would be kicked out, right? They couldn't play. For example, every player on O2 Blast is 17 or older, right? But a lot of the players on that O2 Blast team are 17. And I think that's one of those things that you look at and you say, we don't want to hurt some of these players who are 17 and who might not get a shot in the Overwatch League, who might not get signed to a roster. Now, if I'm a player on O2 Blast, right? If I'm someone like Junbin, for example, and I'm getting contract offers from like some kind of middling teams, like, I don't know, like a team that probably won't be very good. Like, let's just say, for example, we don't know what's going to happen in the APAC region, but let's say the Seoul Dynasty don't want to spend a lot of money on their team, and they're going very cheap, and they don't sign a lot of really good players. If I'm Junbin, I might just stay with O2 Blast, knowing that I'm probably going to be the best team in Korean Contenders, and then we can probably do better than most of the teams in the APAC region. We have to be a top 2 team in the region. O2 Blast is probably a better team than a lot of potential Overwatch League rosters, depending on what they put together. And so I think there is some element to it there where you kind of have this decision now. You can play on your Contenders team that you've been playing with for a while, or you can go somewhere else. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens. We don't know the number of teams yet per region. We know that the LA Valiant have announced that they are moving back to the Western region, most likely because the Chinese scene is gone, because they can't have Overwatch in China right now, and so LGE realistically can't even run the game. They can't run an organization, and so the Valiant are realizing that the cheapest option is, instead of trying to have LGE operate out of Korea, just get a team in the Western region and let them kind of do their thing. So we don't know exactly what it's going to look like. We don't know what the breakdown is going to be. There's going to be 12 teams, obviously, that compete in this thing based on kind of the opens and then the kind of qualifiers and stuff like that. So we don't know exactly how it's going to work out, but we'll see as time goes on, obviously. But I'm very interested to see how that happens. I'm a little concerned about the Western region with Contenders because they're not affected by the change to it being 17 and up for Contenders. You don't have to be 17 to play in Contenders in the Western region now because they're not doing anything other than the Pro-Am tournament, which is before the season officially begins. So you can still be a 15-year-old or 16-year-old in Contenders in the West, in North America, in Europe. That's not going to impact you. But in the Eastern region, if you're in Australia, New Zealand, you're in Asia Pacific, or you're in South Korea, you have to be 17 to play. And that's where I think we're going to see some potential kind of players who are not going to be able to play. It might hurt a bit of the ecosystem in some of the regions, especially South Korea, where you have a ton of talent, ton of young talent who kind of jumps in at 15, 16 years old, gets really, really good. You know, we knew Proper well before he was 18 because he was dominating for several years. He was dominating at 16. He was dominating at 17. And so you have this level of, you have really talented players who aren't 17 yet, who won't be able to play in Contenders. That does hurt the ecosystem a bit. And if that comes to the Western region in the future, that is definitely a point for concern. But right now, the Western region is mostly fine, but I think this is going to open up a lot of people to recognizing that collegiate is probably the best route. We've seen Pre praise it. We've seen Dante and Jake praise it. I think collegiate is becoming increasingly more of the clear-cut best option for you when you turn 18, or at least put yourself in a position to go to collegiate. You know, make sure you can get yourself in a collegiate position. Grind as you can, but don't focus entirely on the game. Focus on getting yourself in a position to get into collegiate and go from there. So spring stage is interesting. It's a little confusing, just kind of the way that the calendar looks, and I'll wait until we get the schedule, the full schedule, or I should say the first half of the year schedule. Another thing that was talked about in that Plat Chat Q&A is that they're not making the whole schedule together. The schedule is going to be made with the spring stage one, and then based on what happens in the spring stage, they'll make the summer stage one so that teams don't basically end up playing a really easy schedule in the first half and then a really easy schedule in the second half just by luck. They're going to try to balance it out. So if a team plays a really hard schedule in the first half, they can balance that out by giving them a bit of an easier schedule in the second half. So they'll play the teams they haven't played yet, but then also their repeat opponents. Let's say the Boston Uprising are the best team in the league and the New York Excelsior are the worst team in the league. They're not going to play Boston in back-to-back stages if that is how it goes, right? They're going to balance it out. They're not going to make them play the really good teams multiple times. They're going to give them the opportunity to kind of play against teams closer to them, so you kind of can give them a fair shot at improving their standings, which I like. And it makes for better games, because then if you're a really good team, you're going to have to play good teams most likely in the second half of the year because you're better than everyone else. They're not going to give you a super easy cakewalk schedule. They're going to challenge you to prove you're kind of good, which I really, really like. As we move into the Midseason Madness, they have announced that it's going to be with 6 teams, 4 from the West, 2 from the East, double elimination bracket. The top 2 teams from the West region spring stage qualifiers will automatically qualify into the Midseason Madness. So they don't have to play for the knockouts, while the other 2 spots will be won through the knockouts. And then the 2 Eastern region teams have to play through the knockouts because, of course, the knockouts is where you bring together your Contenders and your Overwatch League teams, and so they want them all on an even playing field there when they play there. Not much more about it than that. 6 teams is not a lot. They did say specifically, or I will say they didn't say specifically that the playoffs is going to be a 16 playoff. I hope the playoffs is not a 16 playoffs for many reasons. I think 6 teams for the final playoffs is not enough, but I think for a midseason tournament, it makes sense. You're minimizing the amount of teams you have to send to travel, especially with Contenders teams potentially making it in, where they're not, they don't have the same financial situation as a lot of Overwatch League teams do. It makes sense. I think it's a good idea for the tournament. I would have preferred more teams, but I understand why they're doing 6. And like they said earlier, that you have other competition going on, like the World Cup and stuff like that. That helps, I think, break up a lot of this stuff. And so I think for some reasons, you do kind of want to cut back a bit on the Overwatch League to allow stuff like the Overwatch World Cup to breathe more and to have more of its own space and its own place to shine. And that also opens up players to have a little bit more freedom and flexibility if they want to play in the World Cup and play in the Overwatch League. They don't have to, pick and choose one. They are open to be able to do more and be able to play in kind of more things, which is very nice for them. though there are potential issues when you consider the fact that if you're an Australian player on the Australian team and you end up in a team in the Western region and you have to try to play in qualifiers on like mega ping, that can cause some problems. So there are some things that need to be worked out with that, but I do think it's pretty good as things kind of go in that way. They then go to talk about the Western Region Pro-Am. As they say here, competition in the West will kick off with a 3-week Pro-Am tournament beginning March 23rd that gives Contenders teams in the North America/Europe Middle Eastern regions an opportunity to compete against Overwatch League teams. A series of Contenders tournaments in late February will qualify teams to join the West Region Overwatch League teams in a 20-team field. Those 20 teams will be split into 4 groups of 5 for 2 weeks of round-robin group play, and then the top 2 from each group will play in an 8-team single elimination bracket in the 3rd week, and the winning team will take home 100,000 USD. And then there's stuff about registration and whatnot through the Path to Pro channels and websites, stuff like that. I love this. I've been really hopeful we would get to see more stuff like this as the league progress. This is very similar to a lot of other esports and stuff like that. I do think there is, this tournament is a little interesting to see because I don't think a lot of Overwatch League teams are going to go full in on trying to kind of showcase their potential talent. I think a lot of them are going to use it as just an opportunity to kind of get some stage play. But you also can win $100,000, so I think the teams are going to want to win. I don't know how much they're going to be willing to reveal about their playstyle. But once again, 20-team field. We are not told the exact breakdown of the teams. So we don't know exactly how many teams are going to be playing in each region. Assuming there's no changes other than the Valiant, we would have a 14-team North America region and a 6-team APAC region, plus then, of course, Contenders teams in the APAC region playing as well. There are some rumors, but potentially some teams moving around. There's rumors about Dallas potentially going to Korea. I don't know how true that is. We haven't gotten any confirmation of it. Until we do, I'm going to assume that that's not going to happen. That seems weird to me, especially with the way Dallas has kind of cultivated and grown their community locally. It seems weird for them to play in the APAC region, but it is potential based on these rumors. But I'm not going to buy into it until I see it happen because I really don't think it's. I don't think it's true. But this is an interesting kind of thing with the Pro-Am. It'll be interesting to kind of see. I think it's better for Contenders teams. Anything else is a good way to showcase Contenders talent. What's interesting is the March 23rd start date is 10 days after the deadline for all teams to have a minimum of 5 players signed. So every team in the league has to have a team by this point. And so that opens up kind of the question of will we then see teams add some of these players? Because they don't have to have 6 players at that point. They just have to have 5. And if the roster construction is just that prior to the season start, all teams must have a minimum of 6 players signed, season-long contracts. So there's a very real possibility that teams like New York, like Washington, like Vancouver, or the Gladiators, or Houston, teams that haven't announced a full roster, could just walk into this event with 5 players on their roster and that's it, and leave that kind of 6th spot to kind of see who does well in this Contenders tournament, and potentially grab some players from there, and you get to kind of see them play on the Overwatch League stage in a sense. So this will be interesting to watch. I'm curious to see what happens there and what teams make it in and who brings home the $100,000. So this is the unofficial start to the Overwatch League season. These games don't count towards Overwatch League standings, but it will be games that the Overwatch League teams are going to be playing in. And so we'll at least get our first look at the new rosters for the first time, which is really, really cool. But in terms of like actual season start, it doesn't start until April 27th when the actual season begins with the full kind of thing. So a month after that is when the season itself actually kicks off. And then they close this article by talking about the summer stage, where they say it will mirror the spring stage format with the West region jumping directly into circuit play. And in the East region, select top finishers among Contenders teams from the spring stage will automatically qualify for the summer stage qualifiers. And then they talk about how the 2023 season represents an exciting new evolution for the Overwatch League, featuring a more open ecosystem, 2 global LAN events, and thrilling action ahead. And of course, there'll be more stuff coming in the future. And of course, I will talk about that as we get more. Overall, this is a really interesting format to me. I think it has some pros. I think it has some cons. I think the best way to really look at this season of the Overwatch League is to look at this year in Overwatch esports. It's not just the Overwatch League anymore. The World Cup's back, and the World Cup is going to be a year-long event, which it wasn't really in the past. In the past, it was always, you would have some games kind of later in the year, like once you have like the qualifiers, and they would happen in like September, August, whatever, and then BlizzCon happened at the beginning of November, I think, late October. And so you kind of had like a little bit of time. Now you have a much longer build-up to the World Cup. You have the wild card stuff, you have all the open qualifiers and all this other stuff that happens. So the World Cup is a longer event now. And so I think when you view Overwatch esports as a whole, this season of the Overwatch League makes a lot more sense. You're opening it up to a lot of different people. There's way more opportunities now for players who are not on Overwatch League rosters, players from underrepresented regions in the Overwatch League, like Australia and New Zealand, like the Asia-Pacific region. And then with the World Cup, you have South America, which is very underrepresented in the Overwatch League, and some parts of like the Middle East. You know, there's only one player from Saudi Arabia right now. Despite the fact that Saudi Arabia has been historically a very good region in Contenders, at least over the past like 2-3 years, have been very, very, very good. And so it's good to see the opening of the Overwatch ecosystem and adding more avenues for players to play on the global stage, and it gives you more opportunity to kind of showcase your skills. But like I've said, the biggest issue that is running into this season is that the age for players is just increasingly getting raised. Yes, you can be 17 now to join the Overwatch League, which is a change, but you also now, in the biggest region of Contenders in Korea, you can't be in Contenders if you are not 17, right? If you're 16, if you're 15, you used to be able to play in Contenders, now you can't. And that's going to really, I think, hurt the ecosystem, at least for a year. It could hurt the ecosystem long term if that kind of stays in place. But it takes out an avenue for players from the Eastern region, from Korea, from the Asia-Pacific region, from Australia and New Zealand, to get into the Overwatch League. Because now they're not really going to have to get the opportunity to play until they're 17. And you could view it as that gives them a year before they reach adulthood, legal adulthood, I should say, before they're able to get in and kind of get their career start, which could be good. You know, you don't want to kind of exploit young children and kind of use their skills for stuff. But I also do think it can hurt in the long run. And I think if we see that implemented in the Western region, in Europe and North America, I think that could really hurt the ecosystem, because one of the problems that we have seen is that Korea has very high turnover for talent and Contenders. North America and EU doesn't in the same way. And there's a lot of really good star young talent that we've seen come out of the Western region in Europe and in North America that have gone on to the Overwatch League. We have Sugar Free this year, who was like, 14 when he was playing in the Gauntlet? I mean, we're talking about a really young player who has done a lot of really great things in his career before he even hit 18. So there is a lot of kind of potential points for concern there. We'll see what happens as time goes on. Like I said, right now it is only in the Eastern region, so we don't have to worry about that yet in the Western region, but it is a potential thing that could happen. But I am excited for the opening up of avenues. The World Cup has always been good for that. Contenders now, when you get the opportunity to play in the Overwatch League stage, will help. We'll see what happens, but I'm really interested to see this season. So I'm cautiously optimistic because, like I said, there are things that I am concerned about, but I think this season will hopefully be good. And if it's not, there's always a chance to rebound next year if the league doesn't implode, which, as I've said, I'm always keeping my fingers crossed that doesn't happen. But we'll see what happens. But I think the opening up of the ecosystem is ultimately a net positive and will hopefully mean for better things in the future. So that's it for me rambling here and talking. Like I said, a lot of stuff to talk about. So I will link to everything that I brought up in the description if you want to check all that stuff out. Stay tuned. Now that we know when the season's going to start, I can better plan for my roster breakdown. So we're going to get to those hopefully sometime this month, if not early in March. Just depends on kind of what the roster situation is looking like as we start getting closer. But for now, that's it for today. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want more like in the future, consider liking and subscribing. Comment down below your thoughts on the 2023 season format. If you like it, if you dislike it, what you like about it, what you dislike about it, anything like that, anything at all, let me know in the comments down below. Thank you once again. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.